Oh no! Look at this! It's going to take forever to get home now. Abdu's mum pressed the brakes on the car. It slowed down till it was hardly moving. Then it came to a stop at the very end of the traffic jam. "I hate this motorway," she said. Abdu looked at the road ahead. Hundreds of cars were crawling along the motorway, bumper to bumper. His mum was right. It would take hours to get home. "Maybe there's been an accident," he said. "Maybe, or maybe there are just too many cars on the road these days." She turned the radio on. "It's a bad end to a good weekend." "A great weekend," said Abdu. He had been to stay with family up in Manchester. Now he was tired. He wanted to go to bed. He had school tomorrow, but he couldn't go to bed until he had done his homework. Mrs. Hussein, his teacher, wanted everyone in the class to write a story. "Write a true story," she said, "about something that has happened to you." Abdul had groaned. "Nothing exciting ever happens to me," he said. And now it was Sunday night. Mrs. Hussein wanted the story tomorrow, and still Abdu had no idea what to write. Mum kept moving the car forward, bit by bit. The motorway was packed. There were 3 lanes full of cars, lorries, and vans. Mum was in the middle lane. The left lane had the lorries. One was much taller than all the others. The back part of it was a metal container, painted dark green. There was no writing on it. Abdu rolled down his window. The evening was warm. He was feeling hot. He leaned out and looked at the cars ahead. Their brake lights flashed red, on and off, on and off. Suddenly, there was an almighty thumping sound, deep and metallic, like someone had hit an enormous drum. "What was that?" said Abdu. "Was it thunder?" "I didn't hear anything," said Mum. She moved the car forward a bit more. Now the tall green lorry was closer. "That!" he cried. "Did you hear it then?" "No," said Mum. "Turn down the radio. You'll hear it then." She turned it down. "There! It was really loud that time. You must have heard it." "No, love. I think you're dreaming." Mum turned the radio up again. The tall green lorry came closer. It was no more than 50 meters away now, on Abdu's left. This time, the lorry moved. Abdu saw it clearly. The whole of the container shook. There was something inside it. There had to be. There was something inside, banging against the wall and making the drumming sound. Abdu saw the metal move. The side of the lorry had a dent now, like something had punched it from inside. What on earth? The back of the lorry rocked from side to side. "What is in that lorry?" he cried. "Mum, have you seen it?" "Seen what, love?" "That green lorry there. It keeps rocking from side to side." Mum turned around in her seat and looked at him. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I just don't understand why you can't hear the noise or see the rocking." Mum shook her head, turned back, and moved the car again. Abdu looked into the other cars. No one else seemed interested in the green lorry. Was he the only one who could see this? Then there came a new sound, a terrible sound of ripping metal, and 5 enormous claws ripped through the side of the green lorry. It came again, but this time it was the roof of the lorry. Abdu saw a foot kick its way out, a gigantic armoured foot, like a dinosaur foot. The whole of the roof was kicked off, and a Tyrannosaurus Rex stood up in the back of the lorry. A Tyrannosaurus Rex! Abdu knew his dinosaurs. He had watched Jurassic Park 15 times. The T-Rex climbed out of the smashed lorry and jumped down onto the motorway. Then it leapt over the fence beside it and marched away across the fields. Abdu looked again at the cars all around him. No one had seen it. Unbelievable! Mum moved the car forward. Now they were creeping past the green lorry. Abdu stared at the metal, ripped where the claws had sliced through. The lorry driver didn't look worried. He was eating an apple. Abdu leaned out of his window. Mister, you've lost your dinosaur. I saw it escape. It ripped the roof off and ran away across the fields. The lorry driver looked at him in horror. No, he wailed. Really? Then I'm in trouble. That is the second T-Rex I have lost this week. Abdu fell back in his seat. What a crazy thing. But he hadn't imagined it. It really had happened. And it would make a great story. He pulled his homework book out of his bag, found a pen, and began.
Joe and Bella stories. Number 1. Back to school. The summer was over and it was time to go back to school. There's so much to organise, groaned Mum. I can't believe the holidays are over. I don't know why you're complaining, said Joe, who was 10. You don't even go to school. But we have to get you two out of bed each morning, said Dad, and out the door with your homework and clean uniform and a good breakfast inside you before we go to work. Joe was looking forward to school. He wanted to see his friends again. The only thing was, this year his little sister Bella, who was 4, was going to school too. Joe wasn't sure about that. I hope Bella won't be a nuisance, he said to Mum. Oh, she'll soon make friends, said Mum. You'll hardly notice she's there. Joe wasn't sure about that. Bella was very excited. She kept showing everyone her new pencil case and bag and water bottle, and Joe felt he'd seen them 100 times. Finally, the morning came. The alarm went off and Joe and Bella tumbled out of bed and into their new uniform. Mum shovelled cereal into bowls and everyone gulped it down. Then Dad yelled, "I'm late!" and ran to get the bus. And Mum looked at her watch. Come on, kids, let's be quick. I've got work too. When they arrived at the playground, there were children and parents everywhere. Joe waved at one of his friends. Hey, Finn, how are you? Bella had been looking forward to school, but now with big kids running everywhere and all the noise, she wasn't sure. She took tight hold of Mum's skirt. "Mum," she whispered. Mum was talking to another parent and didn't notice, but Joe did. "What's up, Bella?" Bella's bottom lip was wobbling. "I don't want to go to school after all. I want to go home." Joe thought quickly. "If you go home, Bella, then nobody will see your new pencil case." "That's true," Bella admitted. "Also, Mum has given you a box of raisins for your snack." Bella loved raisins. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." Mum took Bella to her new classroom. Joe was so busy that he did not have time to think about Bella until the head teacher, Mrs. Smales, put her head around the classroom door. "Could you come with me a moment, Joe?" she said. Joe was a bit worried. What could she want? "We're having a problem with Bella," Mrs. Smales explained. "She doesn't like her new teacher, and now she says she won't stay." In her classroom, Bella was hiding under a table in the dressing-up area. She had her head buried under the costumes, and she was howling. Joe crawled under the table. "What's the matter, Bella?" he asked. "I don't like her," said Bella, pointing at her teacher. "She's a wolf." "What?" said Joe. "It's just my name," said the teacher impatiently. "I'm Mrs. Wolf." "She's not really a wolf," said Joe to Bella. "She hasn't got a tail." "How do you know?" Joe groaned. He'd known Bella would cause problems at school. "And she's got big teeth," said Bella. Then Joe had an idea. "Even if she is a wolf," he said, "then maybe she's a good wolf. Lots of wolves are. It's only in fairy tales that they are wicked." Bella wiped her eyes and looked at Mrs. Wolf. "She does have nice eyes." "Thank you," said Mrs. Wolf, smiling. "Why don't you come out and listen to a story?" Bella loved stories. She crawled out and gave her hand to Mrs. Wolf. "I don't think she is a wolf after all," she whispered to Joe. "Otherwise she'd have claws." Joe went back to his classroom grinning. It was going to be interesting having his little sister in school. Joe and Bella stories. Number 5. Camping. The Hobson family were going camping. It was Bella's first camping trip, and though she was excited, she was nervous too. "What if the tent falls over and squashes us?" she asked Joe. "It's too light to squash us," said Joe. "Well, what if the wind blows it away?" "The wind isn't strong enough." "Well, what if a wolf comes into the tent and eats us?" This made Joe laugh. Bella had read too many fairy stories with big bad wolves in them. "There aren't any wolves in Yorkshire," he said. "There aren't any wolves in the whole of Britain. Except in zoos, of course." "Well, what if one escaped from a zoo?" asked Bella. Joe said that zoos were far too careful to let their animals escape, and Bella soon forgot about wolves as they started planning for the camping trip. "Let's get ready, kids," said Dad on Saturday morning. "As soon as we're packed up, then we're off." They all helped load up the car. First they put in the tent. It was a big one for the whole family. Then the sleeping bags and blankets. It's cold at night when you're sleeping in a tent. Then they packed the cooking equipment and lots of food to cook. When everything was packed, The car was full to bursting. The Hobson family just managed to squeeze in. Soon they were leaving the city behind them. "Look at the hills," said Dad. "Look at the heather on the moors." They drove up a winding road with no houses until they reached the turning for the campsite. It belonged to a farm and was in a big field. There were views out over the moors and lots of space for people to pitch their tent. "Right," said Dad. "First things first. Let's get the tent up. Here's a good spot, next to this hedge." Once the tent was up, it was time to eat. Then Joe and Bella went to explore. There were trees to climb and a stream for paddling. Bella started collecting tadpoles in a jar with another girl, and Joe played on a rope swing with some of the older kids. The day flew by. "Tomorrow," said Dad, "we'll go for a long hike over the moors." "I can't wait," said Joe. It was getting dark. The family ate sausages and beans, then roasted marshmallows on sticks over a campfire. They drank hot chocolate too. In the darkness, strange rustling noises came from the hedge next to their tent. "What's that noise?" asked Bella. She looked nervous and moved closer to Mum. "Don't worry, it's not a wolf," said Joe teasingly. "How do you know?" "I expect it's just a rabbit, Bella," said Dad. "Or maybe it's just the wind rustling the leaves." Bella didn't say anything more. Of course she was only little, thought Joe. You couldn't really blame her for having silly worries about wolves. "Time for bed," said Mum. They were all tired after a day outdoors. They put out the fire, closed the tent flap, and crawled into their sleeping bags. Soon Bella, Mum and Dad were asleep. Joe was too excited to sleep, so he lay awake thinking about the day and wondering what would happen tomorrow. Suddenly he heard something from outside the tent. A rustling noise. Probably just a rabbit, he thought. Then he heard more rustling. It sounded like something walking around outside. Something bigger than a rabbit. What if, thought Joe, Bella was right? What if a wolf did escape from a zoo? This campsite was just the kind of place it might like. Joe lay there, shivering, as the rustling continued. At last he could bear it no longer. He got up and stuck his head out of the tent. A cow gazed at him over the hedge. She had soft brown eyes and was chewing peacefully on some leaves. "Moo," she said. Joe chuckled to himself as he crawled back into his sleeping bag. To think I was afraid of a cow.